animal park I was talking about earlier would be a good example. Unfortunate outcomes happen, but that business would then be highly likely to be taking preventative measures and adjusting their operations, and in our opinion, making it a good time to provide coverage for the risk. Individual risk underwriting, we evaluate each risk on its own merits and then structure terms and pricing accordingly. Control over underwriting and claims adjusting. We do not outsource any underwriting or management of claims to any external parties.
We do use, and I'll talk a little bit about this, we do use, obviously independent adjusters, because we're based here in Richmond, Virginia, and we have claims in all 50 states. So we do use IAs for task-based activities, but the examiners that we have here in Richmond handle the claim from beginning to end. We don't outsource any settlements or anything like that, negotiations. And
then finally, service. Entertainment risks are no different than the rest of our book of business. Our brokers need quotes, and they need them yesterday. So one of our goals is to try to be the first quote on the table. Great success. So how do we approach some of these risks, and how do we get them to make sense? I'd say the following 6 items come into play. We believe that focusing on underserved segments is a good strategy. These risks will have fewer competitors, or they might be a new business, or they might be a class of business that competitors have cast aside. We've actually seen a good amount of that within the firearm space recently, which has generated opportunities for us. A contrarian risk appetite. As I mentioned earlier with the good and the bad account comment, we're okay with accounts that have had some pretty bad losses. And policy limits. If we can quote low limits, we can make a lot of really tough deals start to make sense.
And that makes it easier on the claim side too, like going back to assault and battery and things like that, where you do have a risk that looks like you're going to get a lot of claims. It's good when underwriting puts on, and I'll talk about coverage in a minute, but it's good when they put on some kind of either sub-limit or eroding limit, defense within the limits, because it allows us in claims to look at the risk and say, okay, well, somebody broke their leg. Maybe we have a $25,000 sub-limit. We're just going to offer that to the person up front and eliminate any additional costs. Sometimes that can be a problem because they won't take it. And then if we didn't have defense within the limits, we end up spending a lot of money on the defense of the claim. But it does give us some leverage to help. It's because it's amazing how the value of the claim is however much coverage you have available. So that's something that I find very interesting is that, oh, you have an excess policy? Well, I want that too then. So that's something nice. Sometimes it actually helps the insured because we can get out of the claim faster. And that's our goal, of course, is to protect our insured and get the claim resolved so that they don't have to deal with more litigation and expense.
And the monitoring involves the collaboration with claims and actuaries. Mm-hmm. And if we ever need to pivot, we can do it quickly. But it's a big deal for us to have that open channel.
Absolutely. We have talked a lot about, that's one of the things that when I have people start that I always talk about that makes Kinsale really different is that, claims is the face of the organization. We're the only ones that really talk to the insureds because underwriting gets submissions from brokers and they send their quotes back out. But us in claims, when we get the actual claim come in, we talk to the insured. We know what kind of, maybe they told us they were doing one thing, but they're actually doing something else. So it's really important to us to communicate with underwriting. Maybe a form isn't working out the way that we thought it was going to. We thought that it would apply to something and it's not, or maybe a venue, like for example, in Colorado, they had changed, and this is construction related, but states change all the time. So we have to change with them. Brennan and I were talking about habitability losses in California, and it's just as the law evolves and people come up with these new and entertaining claims that we laugh about, it's also a good way for us to evaluate what types of forms we're using and what types of, do we really want to be insuring that risk, or do we want to put a form on there that will allow us to kind of mitigate that exposure.
And then lastly, specialization. It enables us to really focus on the product development and the pricing and just the refinement and the monitoring. And so, when you're seeing these risks day in, day out, it really puts you in a position to determine what makes sense and what doesn't. So with that, I'll hand it over to Lauren.
All right. So we talked a little bit about, well, first of all, so our claim department, we handle both general casualty losses. Kinsale also writes, professional liability and claims made in occurrence-based policies as well. But what my team does is mostly the occurrence stuff, and we also handle all of the general casualty that come out of Brendan's book, which are very few. We really don't get a lot. So, so one of the first things that we look at as an excess and surplus carrier is coverage, because obviously we're writing some significant risks for some pretty tight terms. So we want to make sure in claims that we look at what the underwriter intended and that we understand what their goal was. Like, if we did throw in, if it was an axe throwing bar and they're also doing snow plowing, like those things don't match. So that's a pretty wide example. But so we look at coverage first, and we start with the policy. We look at, what type of risk did the underwriter take on here? Is there any special forms that are going to apply to this? Like, for example, a limitation of coverage to designated premises. A lot of times that's something that you guys will do, is you really just want to limit the coverage for the exposure, especially in entertainment, to the actual four walls around where the risk is. So that's one thing that will happen that we need to look at, as well as I sort of mentioned earlier, the assault and battery exclusion. Obviously, everybody knows, the general term of an assault and battery. You think of somebody punching somebody in the face. We have a very, very broad assault and battery exclusion that speaks to harmful or offensive contact, whether wanted or unwanted. So it is really broad. We not only have a full exclusion for that, but I think, as Brendan mentioned, we also have sublimited coverage. So that's one of the things that is really great for underwriting, is that they can really tailor what they want to cover. So if somebody wants to put some assault and battery coverage on the policy, they can offer terms that are, we'll see a 2550 sublimit, and maybe we will provide defense, but then maybe we'll have a $50,000 per occurrence and $100,000 aggregate on the policy, and defense is within the limits. So if we do get a lawsuit, that's going to erode what coverage there is. And then the nice thing for us is, it's maybe not so great for the insured sometimes, but when the coverage is gone, we tender the claim back to the insured. But what we'll also try to do is, if the policy is eroding, we let the plaintiff's attorney know, hey, there's only $100,000 available, period. And everything that you do is actually costing your client money. A lot of them don't believe you, and you end up having to file litigation to tell them, no, seriously, that really is what the policy says. But we've also had that on some liquor liability claims as well. So that's another way that we want to make sure that we're addressing coverage and providing the coverage that the insured actually purchased. One of the other things, especially in the entertainment risks, is a waiver and release. We actually have a form that talks about the insured is required to procure a waiver and a release before there will be coverage afforded for the loss. Obviously, some states like Virginia, a waiver is not necessarily enforceable, but it's an affirmative defense, which I'm going to talk about here in a couple minutes. But that also helps us in the defense of claims. So it's a coverage issue, but it's really one of those things. It's almost like a risk management tool for the insured, because if they have that, I can easily go back to the attorney and say, well, your client signed off. They read that all of these exposures were out there, and they knew that, and they decided to participate in the risk anyway. So if they got hurt doing exactly what they thought they were going to get hurt doing, how are you going to say that we're negligent? And we talked about sublimits. So we first look at coverage. If the claim appears to be covered, or even if there are some potential coverage issues, we'll begin an investigation. And like Brendan mentioned, we do keep everything in-house. We will use independent adjusters for things like task assignments, like going and interviewing witnesses, picking up police reports, maybe doing a scene investigation, things like that. But we try to be really prompt. A lot of times, especially with these newer claims, we have been seeing that they do come in a little bit faster than traditionally. A lot of times our insured doesn't even know something supposedly happened until they get the lawsuit. It's hard to investigate that because they no longer own the property. They've remodeled, they've done this, they've done that. Some of these businesses may not even be open anymore. We had a children's play gym. Yeah, no. And they had the little boy had hurt himself on it was like a Magic Quest thing. Like they have at Great Wolf Lodge, and he was climbing on something and he hurt his finger, but they had gotten rid of it. They had remodeled because they didn't tell him. The parents didn't say that just happened. So then it was an issue of, then it's, well, you got rid of the evidence. It's well, you didn't tell us that there was a problem. So that can be an issue too. So if we do get a claim pretty promptly after it happened, we do try to jump on it and at least secure the scene or go take pictures so that we know what happened. Social media is a great tool. We actually have the ability to hire firms that will specialize in that now, and they'll do a search, because a lot of times, especially again with these entertainment risks, if you're at a concert and you're dancing and you're having a good time, and maybe you're possibly drinking some adult beverages or do things like that, and like Bryn said, maybe you're at a cannabis convention or something, we'll have, people have cell phones and they'll be taking video, and I'll show you a video in a couple minutes. It's kind of entertaining. But that helps us, because if we can secure something like that to show what really happened, it can help us with, a plaintiff attorney, well, your client didn't tell you that they were actually, they had a beer in their hand and they slipped and fell on their own spill that they had on the dance floor, stuff like that. So that's been really useful. People will actually post things. We've had claims where people have product liability claims and all kinds of claims where they'll say, oh, I did this, or I misused this, and I'm so dumb, or I tripped and fell, and I was playing soccer and I was diving for something. And then they'll erase that later when they get an attorney, because it will become, well, no, it was because the ground was uneven and it was your fault. And the social media services can actually go back and get that archived thing, even if it's been deleted. So that can be helpful as well. Obviously, video or photographic evidence kind of goes back to social media as well. We've done witness canvassing before, where we have somebody go out and actually talk to all the neighbors in the area, or all the people that were trying to recreate what happened. Basically, all of this to say, we look at how do we get this claim resolved? Because if the claim is covered, we're looking at how do we move this claim to resolution. And our insured doesn't want to have a lawsuit if it's something where we think that there is liability, or liability is adverse to our insured, we're going to look at how do we resolve the claim, especially on these, these entertainment risks. You would think a jury is going to, it depends on what it is, but if it is something really risky, you don't know. A jury may think that, well, you knew exactly what you were doing, or they may think, well, insured, you run this risky business and this happened, and how come you didn't protect this person from what happened? And so we have to kind of evaluate, where are we? And I'll talk about that in a minute, like venue considerations and things like that. So it's just such a wide variety of things that we have to keep in mind when we're evaluating a claim on this type of business. But we do try to resolve things as quickly as we can if it's something where liability does look adverse. So speaking about venues and affirmative defenses and things like that, I mentioned waivers and releases. As you can see, some people probably ski here, but on your lift tickets, when you go skiing, there's actually a waiver and release on your lift ticket. So by the use of the lift ticket, you're saying that you understand that this is a risky activity. So that's something where we had a claim in Minnesota once where it was a ski resort, and it was snow tubing, and the lady she stood up in the middle of the hill because she got scared. And so she was from Texas, and her attorney tried to argue that even though it was posted everywhere, like don't stop, don't stand up, don't stop in the middle of the hill, like it's dangerous, don't do that, because she got hit by another tuber. He said, well, she's from Texas and she had never seen snow before. Okay, well, it still was all over the place that, there's an inherent risk in doing snow tubing. So things like that, attorneys will make the argument, but we did manage to get him shut down on that one. That, I'm very sorry that she hurt herself, but you can't stop in the middle of the snow tubing hill. We were in a jurisdiction that was pretty favorable to us because they have a lot of skiing venues, and they don't want things to, obviously people will shut down if they can't afford insurance. So that was an interesting one. But that was one where the waiver came into play in the release, because she had also signed a release in addition to her lift ticket. That would also be considered like an affirmative defense. So like I said, in Virginia, waivers are not generally enforceable. But again, if I can say, hey, you signed off, you read all of these things, and you knew what the risks were, and you decided to sign this anyway, that can go towards liability. So maybe it's not something that's a complete bar to you making a claim, but it does play into, hey, you're a reasonable person. You read all this stuff. You knew that there was a risk associated with ziplining over an alligator pool. Yes, sir.
So how often do they say, well, I didn't actually read that, I just signed it to tell you?
Everyone says that.
Yeah, so how often does that hold up in claims?
It depends. I mean, because hopefully with things like those, we try to shut those down early, because obviously they should know. I mean, and again, it's going to depend on where are you. So in different states where it doesn't matter what you did, and it could be totally not your fault, they're still going to give that person some money. So that plays into it too. Like, of course, everyone's going to say, I didn't know, I didn't do it. Like, they're never at fault. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't be making this claim, right? So,
and the age too.
Yeah. When we talked about, yes. So, or maybe it's mom and dad, and they released for the child, and now the child is seriously hurt. And it's, well, the child didn't release, the child didn't know, they're an infant. So, are mom and dad going to be held? But that can go into comparative fault also. So mom and dad knew that there was an exposure by going snow tubing, and they should be partially at fault for allowing it. So it just becomes, all of these things sound really good, like in the black and white world. And that's one of the things about claims that's so challenging right now. And I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes, not to jump ahead. But, we look at what does the law actually say? What is negligence? A duty owed, duty breached, right? Like, and we don't necessarily, did we breach a duty? I don't know. Maybe that's a question for the jury to decide, but it's not always that we actually did something wrong. It's just somebody got hurt on your property. Like you go to Florida and all the billboards say, you know, did you fall? It's that person's fault, wherever you were, you know? And so people believe that that's how it works now. It doesn't matter if you were actually at fault. And I always joke, I'm like, you know, when we do take a case to trial, okay, well, what could our insured have done differently to prevent this accident from happening? I wish juries had to answer that question first before they award money to people. But it just makes it really tough. Like to your point, it's hard because you do have to kind of call people, say, well, I mean, you read it, right? No, I didn't read it. And then you're like, well, how can you even move forward with this? Like everybody should be responsible for themselves. So, but that also will play into comparative fault too. So Virginia happens to be a state we don't actually get a lot of claims in because we have a contributory negligence rule, which means that if you contributed even 1% to the loss, to your own injuries, you are completely barred from recovery in theory. Most other states, there's only a couple of states now that still follow that rule. Most states have moved to comparative fault, which means that the jury can award fault and figure out, you know, maybe you did not read your waiver and maybe you knew there was a risk, but the facility should still have done something differently. So maybe each of you are 50% at fault and they'll award $100,000. That would be reduced by the plaintiff's comparative fault. So they would only get $50,000. Some states are just straight up pure comparative where they'll reduce it by the amount of fault that the plaintiff has. Some states, if it's 50-50, that means that you are barred from recovery, which means that the insured would have to be more than 50% at fault for the plaintiff to recover. Some states are 51%. So, but that whole idea is, you know, the jury can still award money. It's less, you know, iron fist, I guess, if you will, than like, hey, you know, 1%, like one little tiny thing that you did wrong, even if somebody rear-ended you, I guess you could make the argument that maybe you shouldn't have been stopped there or something like that. But it seems like juries sort of move towards, even if you're in Virginia or a state like that, if it should be something where maybe they bear some fault, maybe the jury will just reduce the award. So juries do some crazy things. Venue, that's the other thing. I picked Louisiana because that's kind of a wacky state. But as you can see, you've got different parishes in Louisiana. Here we have counties, but you know, liberal is the red, conservative is blue, and moderate is the gray. So as you can see, I mean, it can make a huge consideration where you actually have the accident. And to put that in kind of local terms, if I used to do auto claims in Richmond, in the area, and believe me, plaintiffs wanted to file in Richmond City rather than in one of the counties. So that's one of the things too, as a claims examiner, what you have to look at is this the right venue? Is this something that should be moved? Is it just that they filed here because they knew that this was a bad jurisdiction for us and they were trying to get a very plaintiff-friendly jury? So that's something to keep in mind as well. So those are all things that we have to take in mind when we're looking at these high exposure or high risk claims. Questions, anybody? Okay. So day on the claims desk. So let me see if I can get this video to play for you. I promised you that I would have. So this is a risk. It is a bar club type thing. And where you're going to want to be looking at is the gentleman sitting on the chair, kind of right up there. Yeah, so he shoves her, right? Because he doesn't want her in his face. He filed a claim against our insured for injuries on our property. This video was very helpful because, you know, she claims that she tripped and fell or that he pushed her and it's an assault and battery and we should have protected her. And it's like, yeah, no, actually you were kind of assaulting him. So those are the things where it's like, it sounds crazy, but people will try to make these types of claims because, you know, they don't realize that we have videos and things like that. So when we do, we get really excited about those things. I think one of the other good claims that we'd had in the not too distant past was a mechanical bull. We had a young lady that was a nursing student who had ridden this mechanical bull probably hundreds of times at our bar. But on this particular day, it was an inexperienced operator of the bull, so she says. So she fell off and she hurt herself. And so that became, you know, how could you do this to me? I was injured at your facility. And to your point, we were able to get her on some of the waivers. She had signed a waiver once a long time ago, and she admitted that she had read it. But of course it was, yeah, but I'm really good at this. And if I fell off, you guys must have done something. It must have been the guy that was running the bull. And I'm like, well, obviously the bull's object is to throw you off. That's kind of the whole point of the exercise. But so we were able to drive down the settlement value on that one by arguing those points. The picture in the middle is just kind of a hotel type thing. Without being super specific, we insured a well-known hotel in Miami that was, we had a very interesting claim from a lady that had gotten so intoxicated that she woke up naked in the elevator and she didn't know how she got there. It was, it was entertaining. You felt bad for her, but you were like, did you? And yeah. So it's amazing how things are, you're like, so you drank yourself into a stupor and that's, okay. Yeah. Luckily we didn't have liquor liability on that one. So, and then the last photo there is Rage Room, which until we got a claim on this a couple months ago, I had literally never heard of them.
Really?
Yeah, I think it was December. Yeah. So we literally, we insure this facility where, as you can see, the person in the suit, they go in and they literally smash stuff. He's using a chair. The one that we had was the bat. And what had happened was it was actually a corporate team building event, which I thought was even funnier. Like, that sounds like, I just don't think I would really want to take my team to a Rage Room. But so the gentleman is there. He's going to smash a TV, I believe it was, and he's got the bat in his hand. And when he goes to smash it, he lets go of the bat and hits his boss in the face. Yeah, by accident. So, which is one of the reasons why I wouldn't go to a Rage Room with my team. But anyway, so I'm just kidding. So he, of course, made a claim for assault and battery, saying that he was injured from the negligence of our facility. Well, this is also on video, and it's pretty clearly an accident. We do have an assault and battery exclusion on the policy, which, the problem is it is an accident. The guy, it's clear that it fell out of his hand as he was going to smash it. But this gentleman also signed, I think there's a release and a waiver. So it's actually Brandon's claim. So that's one of the arguments that we have against him, is like, you knew that there was an exposure. I mean, you're in there smashing stuff. I think that what they foresaw with something like that is, obviously there's pieces of debris falling off this thing that you're smashing. Well, that's more likely to hit you. I don't think anybody really thought they'd get hit in the face with a bat. So, but again, here's a new exposure that we didn't, you don't really think about that kind of stuff. Like, you're trying to hit the piece of equipment, not necessarily each other. I'm sure we will end up getting claims where people are hitting each other on purpose. But at the moment, we haven't gotten any so far. So again, this is the type of thing where when that Rage Room claim came in, I talked to Brendan, I talked to the underwriter, we all kind of communicated about, hey, we got this new claim. I know this is a new type of risk that we're looking at. This is what we're seeing. Again, that's one of the things that when you do have these entertainment risks and things that maybe aren't super established, it's really important to have a good relationship between your claims and your underwriting to share information. And maybe you want to adjust a form, or maybe you want to, well, maybe we didn't mean to insure that. It's like we talked about with the cannabis tour guide. Maybe we want to take off coverage be entirely from the policy, because that's not really what we foresaw when we underwrote. So I don't do underwriting because I probably wouldn't write any policies, but I charge like everything for, very limited coverage. But so one of the other things too, from the claim side, I mentioned, things change all the time. We see complaints pled, attorneys get smart, they plead things into coverage, even though there really is no coverage if we have a duty to defend, because they're saying, hey, it's going to cost you $150,000 to defend this. How about you just give me $50,000 now? So attorneys get smarter as far as how things go with that too. And that's something we want to communicate with underwriting so that we can be more competitive and make sure that we're taking that into consideration when we look at policies and look at risks. Let's see. Gonna go to it again. Okay.
All right, InsurTech. So you thought you were going to avoid hearing about InsurTech by signing up for this breakout session. I think it's impossible to go to an insurance conference in 2020 without hearing about InsurTech. But I just want to make a few brief comments of what I think is on the horizon for us in underwriting. The first one is digital footprint scraping. What I'm talking about here is using underwriting systems to scan the digital footprint of the businesses that we're reviewing, so we can, instantaneously determine what customers are talking about in online reviews. Are they talking about mechanical bulls, nightclubs with bottle service, shootings, bar fights, stabbings. We tell the system basically what we consider to be a red flag, and then the system scans for that information. Underwriting indicators, this would include the use of software to quickly build a profile of the business and then highlight certain items that an underwriter might want to take into consideration. And then finally, automation. In underwriting, this might include using data vendors to supply a lot of the underwriting information and start relying less on the applications that are coming in through the traditional submission process. So I think in the future, underwriters are going to spend less time collecting information as more and more of these tasks become automated.
So going back to kind of the market and what we're seeing, I have touched on the term would be social inflation. That's sort of one of the things in claims and by extension underwriting that we're having to keep in mind, because again, the litigation environment is constantly changing. Things have become more and more pro-plaintiff. We don't see that juries necessarily apply the law. They kind of react with their gut, which plays into the reptile theory issue where they kind of ignore what actually the facts of the loss are, and they focus on, oh my gosh, this insured did something so egregious and it's a safety issue, and by awarding this verdict, you're protecting the public. And it's like they slipped and fell in some water that we didn't, but these people could be injured, your children. And, you think about trampoline parks and things like that we ensure that, yeah, there could be something that happened, but they're going to focus on, oh, they didn't maintain the property. And it's like, they didn't know that it was going to break that day, so there's stuff where it just drives up, they're appealing to jurors' reptilian brains is what their safety, their security, they need to protect society. So it's not really about what this particular claim is, but we're seeing a lot of that, and that creates what we call nuclear verdicts or runaway verdicts. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about social inflation, is that, something where it is a pretty simple slip and fall case that we maybe were able to settle in years past for a nominal amount is now something where, oh, my client is permanently injured and never going to walk again. And, you get video or surveillance of them doing just fine on the golf course. But that also ties in with these brain injuries. We get a lot of TBI, traumatic brain injury claims now, where it wasn't anything for the first 6 months. Maybe somebody slipped and fell and they went for some chiropractic care. Then they meet an attorney and the attorney says, didn't you hit your head? And then it suddenly becomes, oh yeah, I have headaches and I can't remember anything. And that's really not in tracking. Now, I understand brain injuries are scary. Like nobody really knows or understands what's going to happen. The brain's a very complicated organ, but it's really easy to scare people and scare juries with that because they think, what if it was me? And I understand that. But with that said, medically, we can argue that that's not typical the way a brain injury is going to track. It's not going to show up 6 months after the injury and then get worse. But we've actually had a mock jury. It wasn't a general casualty exposure, but we had one in Louisiana, speaking of bad news. But the gentleman actually had gotten hit on the head and he was at work. But that it was exactly this situation. He was fine. He actually tested. He was a contract worker, and he applied for a full-time job, and he had verified he had no issues. He tested well on all the cognitive tests, so there was no problems at all. He then decides 6 months later, he meets an attorney, and the attorney says, oh, you got hit in the head? And so then it became like I went to his, we went to a mediation, and he would be fine speaking like I am right now, and then somebody would ask him a question about his brain injury, and he would say, and I can't remember the word. And anyway, so blah, 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 so it was quite obvious. And so we mock tried it, and the jury actually believed that he was faking, but they felt that since now he had given up his career in the oil and gas industry, that we should give him money for that. So I got nothing. I mean, the jury believed he was faking, but they still felt like he should get millions of dollars because he decided to fake and give up his job. So that's just to say, I mean, there's really no accounting for what juries are going to do. There's no way to know. So that's been a really challenging issue in the claim side, is figuring out how do you value these cases when you don't know. A jury may award some outrageous sum of money to somebody. Yes, ma'am.
So are you guys working to try to do more early settlements?
Yes.
To combat?
Yeah. I mean, especially on stuff where it does, again, we want to pay claims that we owe. right? I mean, it's not, we want to pay claims that are covered and that we owe. So I know insurance companies and claim departments get a bad rap, oh, they don't want to pay my claim. Well, we do if we owe it, but the problem is, what's the value? The other concept, and I'm kind of going off topic, I'm sorry, but indemnity, like we owe to put you back to where you were before the accident. This is not a lottery. It's not a windfall. It's not supposed to be something where you tripped and fell and now you're set up for life, right? So, but a lot of times that's really hard to get across to people that have this attorney that's told them that their claim is worth millions of dollars. So yes, we are trying to drive things quickly and early to mitigate some of this exposure. So, I think I talked about all three. Yeah.
And then on the underwriting side, we're starting to see the market shift from a soft market to a hard market. And more specifically, we're seeing reductions in capacity and more restrictive underwriting and just carriers exiting some segments. In years past, carriers that would offer 25 million in lead excess might come back and offer 10 or just 5 million this year. We're starting to see it in prior years. Our brokers would tell us pretty bluntly that agents would never sell quotes with certain coverage restrictions, but that conversation is starting to shift towards, can you send a quote? We'd like XYZ, but we'll take whatever you can give us. And then finally, we're seeing some carriers exiting some segments because just the results haven't been what they need. We're seeing a lot of admitted markets trying to pull back from higher hazard segments, which is leading to a spike in non-renewals. And that's good news for us in the excess and surplus line segment. This is a view of the insurance market cycle over the last 20 years. On the left, you can see the last hard market. The green arrow is September 11th, 2001, which occurred as the market was firming. And as you can see from the top two lines, it had a major impact on excess casualty and commercial property rates. Then the blue arrow is Hurricane Katrina, and it's noteworthy to see that property rates spiked up there. And for a brief period of time, property rates were actually accelerating. While at the same time, every other segment was just continuing to receive rate decreases year after year after year after year. And then finally, the gray arrow, the point at the very, very bottom of the soft market, that's where all my hair turned gray. All right, but on a serious note, on the right side, you can see the acceleration with rates. So again, that's exciting. That's good news for us in the exit E&S side.
So kind of to wrap up, we do have a couple minutes left, but if you guys have any questions, we're happy to take those. So hopefully you're getting from us, the underwriting and claims team works together. From the claims perspective, as I just kind of went over, litigation environment continues to be difficult for defendants. We're doing everything we can to protect our policyholders and to sort of combat that. Be disruptive as far as when we're defending claims and looking at different ways that we can resolve things quickly. And that leads into the proactive investigation and handling helps drive better settlements. So again, if we get out there quickly, especially on these high risk or these entertainment things, trying to get out there, look into what we have and gather all the information so that we can fairly and promptly evaluate the claim.
And I hope you leave today with a risk of or sense that the risk that we encounter can be somewhat interesting at times, from zip lines over alligators to driving tanks through buildings to conventions with people dressing as cartoon ponies. It's an interesting world we live in. And, to be honest, frankly, I'm happy that, these businesses and risks need insurance. And I hope you leave with a general idea of how we think about some of these risks and some of the techniques we use to approach them. And so to the industry folks in the room, I appreciate your time today and hope you agree it's an exciting time in the industry. And to the students, I just want to commend you on your impeccable timing. I think it's a really perfect time to get into the industry. So I wish you all the best and success. So thanks for joining Lauren and I today, and we'd be happy to take any questions. Alex, what's your question?
I know, right?
So while we've got you here.
Yep.
What are you all seeing come in for the coronavirus? Anything yet?
We haven't yet. It'll be interesting though, because things will be canceled. We've already heard of people, but we were talking about that last night with people coming in even for this conference. I think a lot of the airlines and things are just offering people the opportunity to reschedule, which is great. But it will be interesting to see what happens. Mhm.
You said there's an opportunity of firearms. Does that include manufacturers?
We have a product team that does a good amount of firearm manufacturers.
Really?
Yeah.
You want the Sandy Hook on them?
Yeah. They feel pretty confident. There's some federal legislation, which I understand provides some level of immunity for the manufacturers.
Mhm.
But that's a pretty big class for them. They do a lot of firearm manufacturers, body armor manufacturers, all types of ammunition.
It's out there.
There's some types of risk that you would not.
We're currently taking a pause on trampoline parks.
Mhm.
We were talking about earlier how, there's always a way to make a risk make sense. There's always a price and there's always terms. But some of the challenges that the market just, we're seeing a lot of these go for 20, 25 grand in premium, which just is not enough. So for those, because you get one broken leg and it's 6 digits instantaneously.
Yeah, the trampoline parks things that we've seen, because obviously if somebody's going to get hurt on one of those, it's probably going to be a pretty bad injury. And it's also likely to be a child. So that also puts an emotional component into it. So it's not just what's really the value of the claim. It's, the parents are upset, and, some of those too can end up being TBI because they hit their head or they fell off the trampoline or whatever. And then zip lines, we've seen zip line claims. We're talking about that too, that not necessarily over alligator parks, but we had one in Hawaii once where, the guy didn't slow down. Like, even though you tell them you need to slow down as you approach the pole, and he didn't, and he hit his foot on the receiving pole or whatever, where he ends up. I haven't done a zip line. It's weird. I'm in claims. I don't do things that are risky. So I'm a lot of fun at parties, I promise. So he did break his ankle, and the question, he admitted, he was like, but they didn't tell me. And it's like, well, yes, we did, but that's a space where it's hard to argue that, because it's almost an inevitability. Like, it's going to happen, that people are going to get injured. So if we can get the right amount of premium, that's one thing. But if everybody's writing it when the market is soft, and we're just not getting the premium that we need to make it work.
Yeah, rock climbing gyms is another one. Waivers, it just depends what state you're in.
Mhm.
Waivers often, they'll fall through.
Mhm.
Roller rinks.
Oh yeah, we've had some of those too. Yep. Where literally
Yeah.
it'll be on video. The kid just, that's the thing. You're roller skating, you fall down. Like, it happens. Like, it's just something that happens. And I think we've just moved to something, it's always somebody else's fault, and something happened there. And, if somebody already feels that way, then they're likely to make the claim, and they're not likely to take a nominal amount. They're gonna, especially if it's something that has a high risk, or they were doing something, axe throwing, or, something like that.
The axe throwing experience has been great.
So far, yeah.
Yeah.
It'll be great until it's not. Come back and see us next year, and let's see how we feel then. Yeah.
Those little scooters.
The bird scooters.
Insurance dollars.
I was joking about that last night. I think we need like a decline button on Android Emergency for those, but no, we're not writing.
You have a decline button?
Yeah, it's on their desk. They just hit it. It's like,
It's like the Staples button.
uh-huh. Yeah, I keep wishing we could have one of those too on our letters. Like, just nope.
I think a lot of London, a few London insure some of the big scooter accounts. I don't know how they stay in business, but most of the scooters ending up in the river.
It's crazy.
Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
The last session is going to be in back in the auditorium.
Thank you.
It was nice to meet you all. It was nice to meet you as well. Sorry for dropping everything. Thanks for the introduction.
No questions?